Good day everyone, I'm Kaye Sabido. Together with my group Loren May Ligaspi and John Red Lawrence, we will discuss the instructions and demonstrations.
Chapter Overview. If you needed surgery, would you be satisfied with the surgeon who had never been instructed concerning how to perform an operation? What if in the middle of a transatlantic flight, you learn it while cruising at 35,000 feet that the pilot flying the airplanes you were on had never received flight training? Or what if on the first day with your new golf instructor, she informed you that she had a lesson in her life but had picked up all she needed to know simply by playing on her own? Would you ask for your money back and head to the clubhouse in search of a new instructor? The problem in all of these scenarios, of course, is that we instantly recognize that people do not learn the most skills adequately apart from the provision of formal instructions. And in the case of movement skills, demonstrations provided by trained instructors. Even when a person may have acquired many hours of independent practice, we intuitively know that most motor skills are rarely, if ever, capable of being performed expertly apart from sufficient amounts of instructional practice.
According to Cicero circa 50 BC, a mind without instruction can no more bear fruit than can field however fertile without cultivation.
Verbal instructions and visual demonstrations are critical to the effective acquisition of complex motor skills. They provide information necessary for successful practice that a learner would be incapable of discerning on his or her own. When learning motor skills in formal instruction settings, information on how to perform the skills being practiced is typically provided in a different way. The verbal instructions and a demonstration, both instruction method conveyed to the learner information concerning the goals and proper mechanics of the task to be performed. Hi, I'm Kaye Sabido. I will discuss the verbal instructions. Verbal instructions are part of nearly every formal practice setting. They provide important information about both general and specific aspects of skills performance. Verbal instructions tells the learner what to think about and what to do. They help the learner acquire an appreciation and understanding of performance requirements and goals, direct Apple practice performance, enhance learner confidence, promote skills learning, reinforce correct behavior, and serve a basis for evaluation of learning goals. The instructors need to consider a number of features inherent in verbal instructions. 1. The amount of information conveyed by instruction statements. 2. The precision of the information provided. 3. The critical features of the skills and the environment, and 4. The skill outcomes on which learners should focus their attention. Amount of information. Limited attentional capacity. This is the notion that individuals can only attend a limited amount of information at any one point in time, beyond which process capabilities begin to be compromised. Verbal instructions help learners understand task requirements and goals. A person can attend to only a limited amount of information at any one time. When too much information is presented with single context, a person's ability to process it is overwhelmed. Precision of information. Learners can easily become confused by instructions that are nebulous and developmentally inappropriate. Telling a student in a softball class to which base more may be correct instruction for a given situation, but she may not understand what she says to do. Instruction can also appear and cause confusion for relatively inexperienced learner when they overgeneralize. Verbal cue. A word or short phrase directing a learner's attention to a critical aspect of skill performance or of environmental factors influencing skill performance. Well-conceived verbal cues provide effective instructional tools for both beginning and advanced learners. Research studies have demonstrated that well-developed and presented verbal cues have a significant impact on the amount and quality of learning that occurs during instructed skill practice. Rink, 2009. Verbal cues should focus on critical features of skill performance. One of the most important factors making verbal cues effective is that, when properly designed, they convey important instructional information in a brief and concise way. In limiting the amount of instructional information to which learners are exposed, instructors must focus verbal cues on those features of a skill that are the most critical to performance and learning. Verbal cues should be stated succinctly. Verbal cues should convey an immediately understandable and clear impression of the action required. To this end, verbal cues should consist of brief, succinct statements clearly directing the learner's attention to the action or environmental feature required without the need for unnecessary mental processing. Indeed, The meaning of a verbal cue should ideally be immediately discernible and easily grasped. Most experts suggest that no more than 3 or 4 words comprise verbal chess. Masser, 1993. To help learners grasp the intent of cues, words that convey a type of action are often useful. Limit the number of verbal cues used to those most needed at any point during learning. Keeping in mind that need to limit demands placed upon learners' limited attentional resources, the number of specific cues used at any one point in the stages or learning should be limited to those most critical to a learner's progress. Repeat verbal cues frequently. The repetition of the same verbal cues during practice helps the learner form a strong association between the cue and the required action or environmental awareness. Especially in the initial stages of skill practice, frequent presentation of a verbal cue whenever the specific cue relevant action is attempted can reinforce the connection between eliciting events or features and correct responses. As learners form stronger associations, instructors can gradually reduce the frequency of verbal cues in specific situations to encourage learners to recall and act upon the.
Hi, I'm John Red Lawrence. I will discuss about the attentional focus. To what should learners pay attention when practicing a motor skill? The answer to this question may seem obvious at first. People should pay attention. Problem of perception action coupling the limitations of science and explaining how perceptual sensory information is turned into motor actions. Event code. Sensory information that has been encoded and brought to perception, information about a person's environment. Event code. Sensory information that has been encoded and brought to perception, information about a person's environment.
To understand why this traditional view of the role instructions has been challenged, we need to make a brief detour to consider the problem of perception-action coupling. In performing any skill, two distinct processes can be identified, which are labeled perceptual processes and action processes. First, the performer must perceive what is in the environment. This entails sensory information about external conditions. This information is transmitted over its sending pathways to cortical areas in the brain where it is organized, encoded, and brought to perceptual awareness.
Action code. Information encoded within the motor system related to the execution of some action.
The second series of processes are action processes. Based upon perceptual information, a person decides upon, organizes, and initiates a motor response. These two distinct processes result into different kinds of mental information. Perceptual information from what is known as an event code. The event code is shorthand for sensory information concern. The event code is shorthand for sensory information concerning the state of the environment. It is information that must be attended to and potentially acted upon.
Common coding approach. The proposition that sensory and motor codes share a common domain and are capable of direct communication.
The theoretical bases for these conclusions were sharply challenged by a new view of perception-action coupling emerging in the 1990s. However, Hamel 1996, Hamel and Elsner 2000, and Prinz 199219 in a seminal paper Relationship Between Perception and Action. In this view, event codes and action codes are represented within a common cognitive domain. In this view, event codes and action codes are represented within a common cognitive domain. Prinz called this the common coding approach to perception and action. According to this approach, perceived events and planned actions share a common representational domain.
Their hypothesis. The idea that paying too much attention to one's movement patterns can disrupt efficient performance.
An important premise of the common coding approach for the provision of motor skill instructions is that the execution of bodily movements, actions are always coupled to representations of their effects. This idea actually goes back to the beginnings of psychology. Bliss, 1892–1893, and Boder, 1935. The Bliss-Boder hypothesis, an old principle in the psychology of learning, predicts a performance decrement when performer thinks about body movement patterns or action plans during or immediately be.
Hypothesis. The concept that actions are best planned and controlled in relation to the desired effect of the action.
But if paying intended attention too closely to bodily movements when performing skills is detrimental, to what should performers pay attention? According to Prince, because action and perception share a common domain and are directly linked, actions are best planned and controlled in relation to their perceptual consequences. Put most simply,
internal focus of attention. Attention directed toward the movement patterns used in generating a motor response.
instructions which focused learners' attention on the actual movement patterns involved in producing the skill were labeled as having an internal focus of attention, while instructions directing
External focus of attention. Attention directed toward the effects of a motor response within the environment.
learners to the effects of their movements were labeled as having an external focus of attention.
All subjects in this experiment complete 8 90-second acquisition trials on each of 2 consecutive days. Appropriate instructions, either internal or external focus, were provided to participants before other trial begins, with first trial with the group conceiving no such instructions. 1 day after the acquisition complete retention test was given, all subjects were tested on 6 90-seconds trials. During this retention trials, however, none of the subject to provide with instruction. Instead, they were simply told to do their best. Results of the study showed a clear advantage for external focus group, both acquisition retention trials. In the next slide. Results of this original investigation of attentional focus effects was even more dramatic given the results of the retention test. However, because such results more accurately reveal the true measure of learning. Distance effects. As we have observed, the benefits of focusing on the effects of one's movements rather than on the actual movement itself appears to be pronounced across a wide range of skills. There are, of course, many different movements effects to which learners could pay attention. One that has generated considerable interest in distance effects. Based upon early research studies, a number of researchers noted a tendency for the effects to which learners attend to be more or less beneficial as a function of their distance from the body. Specifically, the further an effect is from the bodily movements producing it, the more powerfully it agrees to benefit learning. At one possible explanation for the observation, Wolf, 2007, has speculated that effects occurring in close spatial proximity to the body are less easily distinguishable from the body than are more remote effects.
Hi, I'm Loren May Ligaspi. I will discuss about the visual demonstrations. Although verbal instructions play a critical role in motor skills learning, visual demonstrations are the most frequently used method of conveying information to learners. It is easy to understand why this is so. Most motor skills, even relatively simple ones, require complex patterns of coordinated limb and body movements. Think about attempting to verbally describe to someone how to tie shoelace, perform a dance routine, do a somersault or hit a baseball. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to adequately convey how to perform these skills in words alone. Indeed, our natural tendency is to show someone how much skills are performed. The adage "a picture is worth 1,000 words" reflects our natural human impulse to show rather than to tell. Observational learning. The learning that occurs as a result of observing another perform a skill. Social cognitive theory. A theory advanced by Albert Bandua that all learning is observational by nature and occurs within a social context. Self-efficacy. An individual's belief in his or her ability to master a task or skill.
Self-efficacy, simple stated, is a measure of one's confidence or belief concerning his or her ability of accomplishing an observed skill. The greater a person's self-efficacy, his or her belief that he or she possesses the ability to perform a modeled behavior, the more information he or she will be able to obtain and retain through observing the more a model.
Bandua's theory of observational learning describes 4 stages in the learning of skill, with each stage influenced by the quality of visual demonstrations and modeling of skills, and all 4 stages necessary for the effective learning of motor skills. Status of model. It has been known for some time that the social status of a model influences an observer's attention and likelihood of repeating the model's behavior. In an early study, Lefkowitz, Blake and Mutun, 1955, demonstrated that a jaywalking model dressed fashionably in business attire would induce significantly more passerby to jaywalk across a busy street than would a model dressed shabbily in soiled clothes. In developing social cognitive theory, Bandura, 1986, hypothesized that the characteristics of a model influenced the attention phase of learning. He believed that a high-status model would elicit greater attention than a low-status model and therefore have a greater impact on learning. Skill level of model. According to the predictions of social cognitive theory, expertly modeled skills are more beneficial to the encoding of memorial representations and therefore more effective in promoting learning. This conclusion resonates with considerable popular opinion. Indeed, many experts in the instructions of motor skills firmly believe that the models should demonstrate skills correctly and as expertly performed as possible. Such beliefs are typically based upon the idea that learners encode and remember exact copies of the skills they observe. Expert model. A skilled model who demonstrates and skill correctly. Learning model, a person learning a skill who demonstrates both correct and incorrect aspects of performance relative to the model's stage of learning. Similarity of model. One model of characteristics that may help explain the effectiveness of learning models is the similarity of a model to the observer. It has long been recognized that learners respond especially favorably to models they consider similar to themselves. McCullough and Weiss, 2001, Rosenthal and Bandura, 1979. Presumably, those observing a model may believe themselves more capable of copying the model's behavior if they also see themselves similar to the model in capability and stage of learning. Observing a similar model should, as suggested by Bandura, enhance an observer's feeling of self-efficacy and thereby increase motivational levels important for attending to and learning from modeled behaviors. Guidelines for providing effective modeling skills. As our discussion has pointed out, research has brought into question a number of traditional beliefs and practices about the most effective method of modeling motor skills for learners. Although additional research is needed to more fully explicate the complex and essential roles of demonstrations in the learning process, a number of guidelines for providing effective demonstrations are well supported by the scientific literature. A listing of some of the main findings and their implications to practice follows. Although not every guideline suggested can be followed in every learning situation, the assiduous use of these guidelines when providing demonstrations can frequently enhance learning outcomes. The use of learning models for demonstrations skills can be just as effective, and in some cases more effective, the demonstrations performed expert. When using learning models, observers should be supplied with the model's feedback whenever possible. The use of models that observers view as similar to themselves, whether expert or learning models, is preferred. Use members of a group being instructed as learning models to increase instructional effectiveness when teaching large groups. Promising directions of research on observational learning. As is the case with verbal instructions, scholarly attention of the role of visual demonstrations has fallen victim to the greater interest in other areas of skill learning until fairly recently. Although the renewed interest in demonstrations and observational learning is encouraging and has already resulted in many new insights concerning the best ways of presenting demonstrations, further research is still needed for more adequately understand the role of visually modeled information when acquiring motor skills. The renewed focus on observational learning has received an unexpected boost in a recent discovery of potentially great importance to our developing understanding of how people acquire and control movement behaviors. This has been the discovery of mirror neurons. The monkeys stared at the graduate student when the student traced the cone to his lips and expected an amazing thing happen. The monitor sounded bing 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 even though the monkey had not moved the cells it's been involved in planning and carrying out grasping and lifting movements became excited simply by observing the graduate student's similar movement.
Key questions: what types of pre-practice information are provided by verbal instructions and visual demonstrations? What are the most effective methods for providing verbal instructions? What is the difference between internal and external attentional focus when providing verbal instructions? Which is the most effective? What are the most effective methods for providing visual demonstrations? How do the characteristics of a model influence the quality and effectiveness of skill demonstrations? What are the motor neurons? How might they explain the processes involved in learning? Summary: although physical practice is essential for the learning of motor skills, the provision of pre-practice information through verbal instructions and visual demonstrations can significantly influence the effectiveness of that practice. Correctly provided, they can reduce confusion, increase learner motivation, and significantly facilitate learning. When providing verbal instructions, motor skills instructors must take into consideration the limited attentional capacity of individual learners, keeping instructions brief, clear, and precise. Research has recently highlighted the benefits of an external attentional focus when provided verbal instructions. Demonstrations can convey information concerning complex movement patterns that would be impossible to communicate verbally. Bandura's social cognitive theory has provided the theoretical framework for most research concerning observational learning and the presentation of demonstrations for motor skill learning. A number of model characteristics influence the effectiveness of demonstrations, including model status, skill level of model, and similarity of model to the learner. The recent discovery of the mirror neuron system has supposed the effectiveness of observational learning and represents a promising avenue of research into the most effective methods of providing demonstrations as well as many other areas of skill learning.